Welcome back, guys. We're going to continue on now with Goya and his print, And There's Nothing to Be Done, which comes from the Disasters of War series. I almost left Goya out of our list today because a couple of years back, we actually got to see a show of Goya at the Kimball. And I guess that pattern just stuck. I should have looked ahead and had you read about Goya, but I can cover him and you can read about him before this writing situation happens. Okay, so I've included some videos and things to help you here, as well as the original article on Khan Academy, so you can see it down here in the notes. Okay. I'm going to get rid of my face here and tell you what you need to know about Spain's probably most well-known and prolific artist that comes from the early 19th century, okay? Francisco Goya y Lucientes is basically just a paragon of Spanish painting and design. He basically tries to mold himself very early on in the style of Velázquez, which you can see here. He's painted a self-portrait in studio with the same kind of format that we see from Las Meninas, and is trying to make the claim that he is part of the wealthy one percenter crowd. He is dressed head to toe in rather brocaded outfits, not typical of what you would expect to see in studio. He looks back at us with a top hat on. I mean, he's really trying to muscle his way into an appointment as the chief painter of the court, and has done fairly well at this point with his designs for tapestries that catch the eye of the then monarch Charles the Fourth. Unfortunately, though, for Goya, he's yet to realize that this version of Spain is not Philip IV's version of Spain, and he is going to wish that he had probably gone a different direction. He gets the commissions basically to paint some of the upper crust, some of their children, some of their love interests. And it's from these dukes and duchesses that the king begins to take note of a new painter who's able to capture the sitter in a unique and interesting kind of way. Goya is often considered one of the first modern painters in that he removes settings and backgrounds that we normally would use to make meaning out of the figures that we see in his works. Here, Doña Isabel de Porcel, one of his most famous portraits, basically serves as the Mona Lisa for Spanish art at this time. It is kind of a twisting and turning force of energy to be reckoned with, and that we see the brushstrokes are allowing us to move around the figure as she turns one way and looks back the other. It's almost like we're standing in her presence. It's that lifelike quality that really does grab the attention of the monarchs, as you can see here, Charles IV and his family. Now, this was a difficult portrait for Goya to make. He's now gotten what he was seeking for as a young art student, the appointment as official court painter, and he's got to make these people look good. It's a challenging job because, as you can see, they're not incredibly beautiful or idyllic. It's almost as if the Infanta has grown up and grown old, and this is what has kind of taken over the royal palace in Madrid. But you guys can see Goya is in the back, and he's using Velázquez and Las Meninas again, as if to say that this is the same family or the same powerful stronghold. But he thinks very lowly of Charles V. His wife basically makes all of the decisions, and he is going to be seen as a weak ruler. As a matter of fact, it's his weak administration that allows Napoleon from France to come in on the ruse that he's just passing through on his way to Portugal. But it ends up that he stays in Spain and deposes the king, putting his brother on the throne. So that weak rulership led to a lot of hardship in Spain at the hands of the French, and then later after that war at the hands of a plague and famine. Essentially, because of this man's administration, Goya kind of blames him for the demise of Spain altogether. But a couple of things to note with this portrait. Again, just like Velázquez, he focuses on the fabrics to try and make the people as beautiful as possible. I'm told that the son of the king, who kind of looks like a bloated George Washington here, is basically not married at this time. In order to suit the needs of the patron, though, this female is put into the painting. Her head is turned backwards so that it's unclear what her identity is, and she can be assumed to be any female that the young prince is courting at the time. If you take a closer look at the family, you can see what I'm talking about. Not the most beautiful people in the world, but they approve of this portrait and life moves on. So there is a whole other series that's very similar to the Disasters of War called Los Caprichos, which you may be familiar with from your Spanish classes. And this frontispiece, The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters, is one of his most famous. That's supposed to be a self-portrait of the artist who has fallen asleep hard at work. And he has the owl of invention jabbing him there with a Conti crayon, while monsters fly up out of the background of an unchecked mind. There's a lynx at his lower left, his left, our right, and it looks to be watching the situation as the monsters begin to emerge, completely unchecked by this lack of rational thought and order. This is the debate that's going on in the rest of Europe at the time. The battle between rational thought versus passionate, interludes, and it's typical of what we were seeing the French artists deal with at the time. He is becoming, though, a master of printmaking and finding that he can make a lot of money making these series for wealthy one percenters who like to collect them and use them as conversation pieces. This particular set eventually pays for one of his sons to go to art school, so it becomes a handy endeavor for sure. There are other works that we could look at here. One in particular gets him in trouble with the Spanish Inquisition. This is the clothed Maha and the nude Maha. We're told that the sitter and her identity were kept secret because the face we're looking at is actually a mask, a generic figure's face. It doesn't quite match her neck and shoulders. She is supposedly protected by the Inquisition. If someone comes to town, comes to the villa, they can lower this panel in front of this panel, and the representatives of the church are none the wiser. But it shows you that he is part of that long-standing female nude tradition and is able to update everything for the Spanish court that he needs to. It's with the Napoleonic era that he begins to make his signature pieces that identify him as being part of that darker side of Romanticism. Violence and chaos are going to ensue in some of his major works, and he will cast them on a grand stage. This is the 2nd of May, and it shows an uprising that happens when locals in Madrid outside of Palacio Real realize that the family is being deposed. Charles IV and his family are being escorted out of the palace, and Joseph Bonaparte is moving in. And that riot ensues, killing, as you can see, Frenchmen in the bottom of the picture. This man being dragged on his horse. There are civilian casualties as well. But because of what happens on the 2nd of May, we get his iconic depiction of the 3rd of May. Outside the city, in the dark of night, we have the militant French soldiers who aim their rifles. They are faceless to us, and all we can see are the individuals that look over on the left-hand side back at the French soldiers pleading for mercy and help or salvation. Of course, we shouldn't expect it. We can see that they've already been at work. You have fallen victims on the lower part of the composition who are all illuminated by some kind of machine-like light. It's unflinching, it's unfeeling, it's unthinking. It's simply going to do its job of illuminating the target, so making the job of assassination even easier. In the background, guys, you can see there is a church and it is dark. There is no light coming from the institution of religion. There is nothing there to save the people from the advancing invading army. So these people are martyrs for a new Spain. If you look carefully into the hands of the guy in white there, who's basically a version of Christ, you can see that he's already got stigmata. And what Goya has done, he's turned a historical event into something that can basically function as an altarpiece for the people of Spain. That's where the Disaster of War series basically gets started. From his many accounts and many stories that are told to him of things that have happened all through Spain during the conflict and after, he's able to concoct a series of events that he puts into print to kind of draw attention to the horrors of war. It's not a series that really sees the light of day until much later after his death, later in the century, about the same time that the Lady Liberty leading the people is finally put back into the Louvre. But he basically wants to make sure that people are aware that these things are atrocities that were wreaked upon the Spanish people by the French. You will see all kinds of atrocities, but it's this scene that shows up in our image set, and There's Nothing to Be Done is the English title. It's very, very similar to the 3rd of May. So now you understand why I spent some time with you on that piece. We see a man tied to a pole, blindfolded, all in white. Almost seems to suggest the same kind of martyred victim that we saw in the previous image, and we can see what's going to deliver the final blow. You look behind the man, you see other victims going through the same kind of punishment. You see the same Napoleonic uniforms of the French, and you see victims on the ground who are bleeding out from their wounds, so we know what's going to happen. It's only when you look to the far right and you notice that there's a whole other group of people with muzzles pointed at this victim that the scene is much more broad than what can be packed into this small little print. I want you guys to know the process. It is etching again with dry point. Dry point is actually what you do to the plate after you've already put it into the bitten acid bath. If there are details that you want to make crisper or sharper or more emphatic, then you use a burin to carve back into the plate again. Essentially, this is a piece that's meant to get a rise out of the viewer. The helpless victim, basically being martyred by the French, was supposed to make you feel sympathy and to make you feel like Spain has been dealt a horrible blow. So looking at the two side by side, I think they wanted to include this as an image of engraving, of etching, because they needed one for the 19th century, and Goya is by far and above one of the best. He's able to stage these things like they're movies, and what he does in painting resonates just the same in black and white. So I think that's why the conscious choice was made to include this particular work. So, of course, you can't really talk about the print without talking about this grand, huge, colossal size painting, which, guys, literally is about 8 feet tall and the size of my bedroom interior here. It's a huge history piece, and the small little print has all the weight and gravitas of the original. So you might see this one from the article. No se puede mirar. You cannot look. Basically the same kind of format to be attributed to Goya. It has the same subject matter. It has the same style, the same highlights on figures who look like they're being martyred for the Spanish cause. in the same media. So I think it would make a pretty good attribution for Goya during this period. But um, from that, I will end. I'm not going to go on. I've got some other works I need to get to today. So keep tuning back in. We will get there as soon as you take a short break. Go get a snack.